Welcome to this week's edition of The Wrap. To the regular listeners of this podcast, I hope you find this week's edition better quality than usual as we've decided to up our game a little bit. Now, does Raymond Zondo ever sleep? He released part 2 of his report from the State Capture Commission today, and we summarize it for you. Plus, he made a guest appearance at the interviews for our next Chief Justice that were dominated by gender issues. Speaking of gender, can anyone guess what Riri's new babies might be? She got the world talking with her pregnancy bump and sent her ex Drake off into a sulk, probably in his tracked private jet. More on that later. Plus, we've squeezed in a quick explainer on why the petrol price is so high and what you can do about it. So, let's dive into your weekly update of empowering and easy to understand news brought to you by myself, Verashni Pillay, and the Explained Akosa team. First up, this week, the government dramatically eased rules around quarantine and isolation. Previously, if you had knowingly been in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19, you had to isolate for 14 days. If you've done that, you know how long 2 weeks can seem all by yourself. Now, under the new rules, if you test positive and you're symptom-free, you don't have to isolate at all. That's right, you can go out and live your best life. Now, look, if you do have symptoms, particularly a cough and fever, then you must isolate, but just 7 days. It seems we're finally starting to see the light at the end of the dark COVID tunnel. But why the shift? There are several factors at play, as public health expert Professor Musa Moshabela pointed out in an illuminating Twitter thread recently. Firstly, immunity is on the up. We know that COVID antibodies don't last very long after someone has been infected. But as Moshabela points out, although there's a waning of antibodies, the cellular arm of the immune system is durable and will protect people from severe disease and death. All of that medical jargon to say that it's not just about antibodies and immunity does exist in other ways. Secondly, because of the onerous rules around isolation and quarantine, many health workers were forced to isolate every time they were infected, even if they were fit to work. Colleagues they'd interacted with had to quarantine. This depletion of the health workforce created a bit of a crisis, as you can imagine. And lastly, investment into isolation and quarantine infrastructure and services cost the government a pretty penny, but did not yield proportional results. People weren't getting that sick, and they were essentially just staying at home and not using the government's services and infrastructure. So essentially, it did not make sense to spend so much taxpayer money and deplete the workforce at the same time when all the data showed that symptoms were increasingly becoming milder, especially after the last Omicron variant. Now, that's part of a global push to ease rulings. This week, Denmark was the first European Union country to scrap all its COVID-19 measures. Nightclubs are open, late-night alcohol sales have resumed, and Danes no longer have to wear masks in public. Lucky them. Norway is also following suit. But remember that COVID is not quite cancelled, especially for those who are vulnerable. It can still also deeply affect those who are otherwise healthy, because long COVID is no joke. As Moshabela puts it, and we have to agree with him, personally, if I took a screening rapid test and found that I have COVID-19 but I'm asymptomatic, I'd still like to protect all my contacts by isolating at no cost to the state. I'd like to still notify all my contacts so they can observe their symptoms as well. Hear, hear. Moving on to the big story, Raymond Zondo and the curse of the Guptas, with apologies to Harry Potter. Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has been a busy man. He dropped part 1 of his state capture report drawn from the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, which he chaired in the first week of January. The second volume followed just a few weeks later and landed on Tuesday this week. Now, the Commission focused on corruption on a grand scale at our state-owned enterprises, SOEs. The first report tackled South African Airways and its subsidiaries, the Guptas' New Age newspaper, and the South African Revenue Service. This week's report, weighing in at a whopping 506 pages, dove into the SOEs of Transnet and Denel. It focused mainly on how 2 former Transnet CEOs, Brian Molefe and Siyabonga Gama, enabled corruption and racketeering at the railway company when they teamed up with the Guptas. The report clearly states that state capture started at Transnet in 2009 when the former group CEO, Maria Ramos, who went on to ABSA, resigned and Jacob Zuma became president. The scope of investigation ran between 2009 and 2018, which many think of as the dark Zuma years. Now, according to the report, corruption at Transnet accounted for a crazy 72.2% of all government and SOE contracts linked to state capture. Think about that. Over 2/3 of state capture happened just in our railway company. Considering the actual scale of state capture, which involves several other entities like the perpetually troublesome Eskom, which, by the way, has load shed us again this week, that's a lot for just Transnet. So what's next for those named in the report? Zondo has recommended that Gama Molefe, former Transnet CFO Naj Singh, and Gupta associate Salim Issa, among others, should be subject to further investigations and possibly be charged with corruption and racketeering. When the first report was released, the National Prosecuting Authority announced it would establish a separate task team with the Hawks to deal with state capture arrests and prosecutions. But as we previously pointed out, the NPA has been achingly slow to take long-awaited action against those implicated. Now, part 3 of the report will be released by the end of this month. Zondo may need a long holiday after all of that. Moving on to your briefs, Riri's bumps out to Drake. Superstar Rihanna is many things, one of the best-selling music artists of all time, a businesswoman whose inclusive Fenty beauty range made her 2021's wealthiest female musician, a philanthropist, and even the unofficial Queen of Barbados, as we like to think of it. Her official title in her home island is, of course, National Hero. But on Monday, Riri added another title to her list, that of mother. She sent the internet into a tiz by casually strolling down a street with her longtime boyfriend, A$AP Rocky, real name Rakim Mayers, visibly pregnant. The couple, both 33, were photographed out in New York City over the weekend, where Rihanna debuted her baby bump while wearing a semi-open long pink jacket exposing the much-talked-about bump. Cue all her fans going crazy, but maybe not so crazy as a certain famous ex, Toronto rapper Drake, a.k.a. Champagne Papi, as he's also known, dated Riri way back in 2009 and has repeatedly professed his love for her over the years since their brief dating relationship. Now, fans were waiting for him to react to this news, and he did not disappoint. He silently unfollowed both A$AP Rocky and Rihanna on Instagram following the pregnancy being made public. Poor dude. Moving on to adulting, petrol price shock again. We told you 2 weeks ago to tighten your belts as we're facing several price increases. The first was electricity. We're still watching whether NERSA will grant Eskom its controversial proposed 20.5% hike. We also saw interest rates increase last week, and now the anticipated hike in petrol prices kicked in on Tuesday evening. I hope you fueled up with the remainder of your last salary after January. Kidding. I hope you have more than that and that you have something saved for Valentine's Day. Now, petrol 93 and 95 increased by 53 cents a litre, while diesel increased by 80 cents a litre, and illuminating paraffin increased by just over R1 per litre. Now, the increase was mainly driven by the high price of Brent crude oil, which pushed up the overall price of fuel. It could have been worse, but thankfully the strong rand-to-dollar exchange cushioned the blow for us. But there are other factors contributing to the price of fuel. I'm going to run through 3 of them. Number 1, the cost to import fuel. Petrol is South Africa's largest single import. Secondly, regulating costs and profits for wholesale retailers and transport services. And thirdly, the tax and levies which goes to the Road Accident Fund, which is, of course, controlled by government and ensures road accident victims on South Africa's roads. So those are the 3 factors, but it does mean that our price of petrol currently is very high. And you know what? The way it's calculated does not have to stay that way. Petrol prices are now hovering around record levels, and the Automobile Association of South Africa, the AA, have called on government to review exactly how they calculate the petrol price for South Africa. And that's because we're still using a petrol regulating system that goes as far back as the Second World War, we know. And this system is said to largely protect the profits of investors in the value chain. But of course, and that's according to a great explainer in the conversation. Now, South Africans are feeling it. A global comparison of petrol prices shows us that in mid-2021, South Africa's fuel price was at 17.20 Rand, just above the average of 16.97 Rand at the time, ranking us at 91 of the 167 regions analyzed by the Global Petrol Price Report. So where does that leave you? If you're up to it, the AA have started a petition called Review the Fuel, which has already garnered over 25,000 signatures. Google for it and sign up if you're interested. Moving on to the JSE interviews, where gender took a centre stage. This week was dominated by the interviews for the head of South Africa's court, and it kicked off on Tuesday in Sandton. The position of Chief Justice has been vacant for months now after controversial former Chief Justice Mogoeng left the position early. He took long leave 3 months before his term was meant to end. Now, the Judicial Services Commission, the JSC, is in charge of these all-important interviews, and it's made up of 23 commissioners, including a rather large proportion of politicians. As we've pointed out previously, the body has its issues. Last year, it was forced to rerun interviews for Constitutional Court justices after Julius Malema and Mogoeng questioned Judge Daya Pillay's suitability for the position, based purely on her friendship with Pravin Gordhan, the former finance minister, while 2 candidates were bizarrely drilled Meanwhile, two candidates were bizarrely drilled by Malema and advocate Darlene Porfu about their suitability as white men. This time around, the issue of gender was front and center. Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, President Mandisa Maya, is the first woman shortlisted as Chief Justice and a firm favorite for the position. She's an admirable candidate, but the fact of her gender led to some strange questions from the commissioners. Speaker of Parliament, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, asked another male candidate, Justice Mandla Madlanga, if South Africa is ready for a female head of the judiciary. Madlanga, visibly frustrated with the question, answered saying, "I believe that Justice Maya is a competent candidate for the position of Chief Justice, much like any of the male candidates." Malema pressed him for a yes or no answer, to which he defeatedly said, "I accept that we are ready for a female head of the judiciary." Maya said she found another version of the question directed to her patriarchal and patronizing. Perhaps a better use of the Commission's time and interest in gender would be interrogating the gender issues raised by Maya herself in her interview, such as the judiciary's alleged lack of an anti-sexual harassment policy and her experience of being the rare case of a pregnant sitting judge. As she said, "They did not know what to do with me. Eventually, I was advised that the minister would give me 4 months' leave allowed under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act." Meanwhile, today, Judge President Dunstan Mlombo had to answer to allegations that he used his role to request sexual favors from women hoping to act as judges in the Gauteng High Court. Mlambo told the commission that these were baseless rumors that were manufactured to discredit his candidacy for Chief Justice. Expect to hear more about that as that news unfolds. Now, interviews for all 4 candidates, including the possibly sleep-deprived Raymond Zondo, will wrap at the end of this week, after which the Commission will deliberate and make the recommendation for the final appointment to President Cyril Ramaphosa, who must make the final decision. On to some international news. If Elon Musk offered you 76,000 Rand to delete your Twitter account, would you do it? Jack Sweeney, a 19-year-old aerospace student at the University of Florida in the US, clean rejected the offer. Sweeney runs a cheeky Twitter account called @ElonJet, which tracks every movement by Elon's private jet drawn from publicly available air traffic information, while speculating on what Musk and co. may be up to with their various flight movements. Now, Musk privately messaged the teen in November last year, asking him to delete the account for $5,000 because it compromised his safety, saying, "I don't love the idea of being shot by a nutcase." Sweeney, who publicized the exchange, countered that the payment does not replace the satisfaction he gets from running it and proposed another offer. Any chance to up that to $50,000, which would be, wait for it, 768,000 Rand. As he said, it would be a great support in college and would possibly allow me to get a car, maybe even a Model 3, cheekily referencing the Tesla range. Musk, however, declined, saying it did not feel right to pay to shut down the account. Sweeney did assure Musk that there are mechanisms to protect the jet's identifying number. Now, Sweeney, who is an aviation enthusiast, also has tracking accounts for private planes belonging to other wealthy people like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and even Drake. We assume that he is fleeing heartbreak on that jet. Now, Sweeney says that he's a fan of Musk's and was hoping for an internship at Tesla if nothing else, but we think the Pretoria-born millionaire would demur, given that he then blocked Sweeney. But Sweeney has already parlayed the viral exchange into a career opportunity. A private charter firm has offered him a job in its tech development team. Now, that's the way to do it. Moving on to the SABC. Now, our public broadcaster, the South African Broadcasting Commission, has long been the victim of political interference, from the apartheid era to democracy, and now there are fears of more of the same. Last week, the public broadcaster's head of news, the respected Patisiwe Magopeni, was dismissed for misconduct following an ongoing battle with her bosses. Magopeni was ostensibly dismissed for airing an interdicted episode of investigative current affairs show Special Assignment. But she says that there are more nefarious reasons at play. Her refusal to give the ANC favourable coverage in the last election. Magopeni says her dismissal comes after the ANC's Fikile Mbalula blamed the public broadcaster for the party's dismal performance in the last elections. Magopeni had allegedly also come under fire from her seniors for not interviewing Ramaphosa ahead of the local government elections. Interestingly enough, Magopeni was dismissed after a disciplinary hearing, despite the chair of the hearing advising against it. The SABC Group CEO, Madodo Mxakwe, cited a breakdown in the trust relationship between her and the broadcaster, and she was axed. Now, the South African National Editors Forum have slammed the decision, and Magopeni plans to legally challenge her dismissal. But before this, it seemed the SABC was finally starting to shake its image as the, quote, mouthpiece of government, close quote, under recent management. Their news channel was the first place people would turn to for important presidential announcements. We were impressed at how stations like SAFM and other parts of the SABC have constantly been delivering quality independent news of late. This after it was decimated in previous years, particularly under former Chief Operating Officer, the notorious Hlaudi Motsoeneng. You'll also remember its financial losses over the year, which it continues to see, plus the disputes around the SABC 8. The SABC is increasingly important as a source of information as traditional media business models suffer. High-quality journalism is often behind paywalls these days, leaving masses of poorer citizens vulnerable to fake news. A public broadcaster fills this gap, as we see with the prestigious BBC in the UK. For the SABC to do the same, people like Mogopeni must be allowed to do their work unhindered. Finally, on to some politics news. The DA is reeling from a fresh scandal. Western Cape MEC of Community Safety, Albert Fritz, was suspended last week after it emerged that he had been allegedly sexually harassing staffers in his office. The Sunday Times reported he would hound young staffers with late-night messages asking them to come to his room during out-of-town trips. Fritz's boss, Premier Alan Winde, said he had suspended the MEC after he received complaints from staff members in Fritz's office. I am now able to confirm that the serious allegations against Minister Fritz relate to sexual misconduct, he said. Brett Heron, Secretary General of Good Party, said that he first received allegations after leaving the Democratic Alliance in 2019, revealing that the pattern of abuse began during Fritz's stint as MEC of Social Development. As Heron put it, Albert Fritz was using his position to take advantage of young interns and job seekers in the Department of Social Development, Heron told the Sunday Times. And of course, Brett Heron was part of Patricia de Lille's party that joined with the DA briefly before leaving and becoming Good, the ID. Now, 4 other community safety staff members in Fritz's office have also been placed on suspension for allegedly enabling the behaviour by the MEC. Fritz has not responded to any of these allegations, while Premier Alan Winde has appointed advocate Jenny Williams to conduct an independent investigation. I said that was the last story, but I was lying. There's one last story on Rasta. So bad, he's good. Picasso, Salvador Dali, and Frida Kahlo have nothing on South Africa's notorious visual artist Rasta. He's become famous for his hilariously bad paintings of public figures, dead and alive, which regularly trend on Twitter, along with some form of "he's at it again." We all get a kick from the disfigured faces and crooked noses, but what do we know about art, right? That's exactly Rasta's attitude towards his haters and trolls, especially on social media. As he said, "I'm humbled to keep my cool and soldier on every time I'm being attacked." Formerly from Zimbabwe, Rasta has made a name for himself in South Africa, even if it is for the wrong reasons, and now he's even heading to the big screen. First, he landed a spot in a Chicken Licken advert which satirically mocks his painting. He's also set to play a part in telenovela Dip City on Mzansi Magic, and he'll also be starring in a Ballantine's whiskey advert alongside DJ Sinza, he told the South African. So, next time you don't believe in yourself, think of Rasta. If he can do it, so can you. That's it from us at The Wrap, an award-winning product of Explain.co.za. Simple news for busy people. The Wrap is sponsored by Explain's agency division. We specialize in content marketing for purpose-driven organizations, often with a pan-African reach. Mail info at Explain.co.za for a quote. Finally, remember to share the love. Tell your friends to sign up for the updates at explain.co.za/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from the team.